We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles...
At precisely midnight, while Britain slept and the palace corridors stood pitch black, King Charles placed his pen to paper and made it official. It was final. No public announcement from the gates, no warning to the press. No last-minute negotiation. With one swift, unyielding stroke of blue ink, the king ordered every remaining royal title connected to Meghan Markle stripped away completely. I have spent weeks piecing together the timeline, examining the hidden paper trail and secret logs that led directly to that room. What I uncovered was not a routine bureaucratic change. It was an execution.
We are commencing legal action against Mrs. Meghan Markle. Her televised allegations, particularly the Oprah interview, have inflicted undue harm upon the royal family. An apology no longer suffices. The matter will now proceed through the...
For years, the palace endured public attacks, tell-all books, and explosive television interviews. But none of those broke the monarch's patience. Something else happened behind closed doors. Something so damaging that Charles felt he had no choice left but to cut the cord at midnight. Before I take you inside the private memorial service where the final line was crossed, hit that subscribe button and join our community right here as this story unfolds. Hi viewers, if you were in King Charles's position, would you strip Meghan's royal titles to protect the crown, or would you keep them to save your relationship with Prince Harry? Answer in one simple sentence below. I want to see what you think. Charles remained frozen in his chair after the ink dried. Across the heavy mahogany desk, a senior constitutional advisor waited in absolute silence, holding a leather folio containing the sealed order. Neither man spoke. The directive was an uncompromising command carrying the full weight of the sovereign's authority, instructing every single palace department to erase Meghan's royal titles from all official use moving forward. It was immediate, it was clinical, and it left zero room for appeal. The king read the final paragraph once, then he read it again, as if a second reading might somehow soften the blow. It did not. His hand rested beside the parchment before he slowly set the pen down. The hesitation that had crippled his decision-making for months drained from his face, replaced by a cold, unsettling resolve that had taken years to harden. The advisor watched him closely. He knew why this moment mattered. It finally closed the dangerous loophole between private family ties and public royal privilege. But Charles closed his eyes for a quiet moment. He understood that while the order stripped his daughter-in-law's legal status, the deepest wound would land somewhere else entirely. Thousands of miles away in Montecito, Prince Harry would not see this as a necessary constitutional boundary. He would hear only rejection. He would see it as a cruel, calculated judgment against his wife. That realization made the king's victory feel hollow. The institution had gained total clarity, but a father was about to lose whatever fragile thread of trust remained with his youngest son. Have you ever wondered why a monarch would choose midnight to sign an executive decree? The timing was engineered with ruthless precision. By acting at midnight, administrative departments could begin altering internal records, removing digital listings, and updating diplomatic protocols 6 full hours before dawn. Palace communications teams could lock down one clear, controlled narrative before competing media stories or legal challenges could take root across the Atlantic.
Today, according to multiple sources, it's now a matter of when, not if, he strips Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal titles.
It was a silent administrative ambush, but as I dug deeper into the palace records, I discovered a chilling detail that most people completely overlooked. A second sealed instruction sat directly beneath the main decree, wrapped in red ribbon and stamped with royal wax. This second document ordered a top-to-bottom review of every ceremonial privilege still linked to the Sussex household. Invitations to state events, formal registries, future appearances. From that exact minute onward, every single connection was to be reconsidered, evaluated, and potentially revoked one by one. Then, the heavy silence inside the office broke. An aide waiting in the dim outer corridor received a coded, encrypted message confirming the king's signature was complete. He read the text twice. His grip tightened around his phone as he dialed a secure line, calling Prince William directly. The future king answered before the second ring. What William heard over the receiver carried severe consequences that no official briefing could soften. The decree looked clean on paper, but behind every legal sentence stood three people bound together by resentment, loyalty, and unresolved trauma. Charles saw an institution being slowly dismantled from within. Harry saw a wife he had sworn to protect at all costs. And Meghan saw the last remaining symbols of her royal identity slipping completely out of her reach. This was not a routine administrative adjustment. It was a devastating family tragedy, written in the unyielding language of constitutional authority. Harry stood completely motionless in his Montecito home, the phone pressed against his ear as William read the exact terms of the decree over the line. William kept his voice flat, controlled, and detached, but he knew what this meant. A sovereign directive was a permanent command. There would be no gradual transition period, no symbolic delay, no private compromise. Meghan watched her husband's jaw tighten before he slowly lowered the phone. She didn't scream. She didn't demand answers.
King Charles has finally done it. He has stripped
When Harry finally spoke the words and told her the king had signed it, she stared into the distance with a stillness that felt far more terrifying than rage. The titles no longer gave her an active role, but they were her last bridge to the institution she had once joined. Losing them meant the palace wasn't just updating language on a website, they were erasing her belonging. What had she done behind closed doors that pushed Charles to sign that document at midnight? The answer was locked away in a confidential palace dossier, and what happened at St. George's Chapel was about to come to light. For months, the public believed they knew the real reason behind the bitter war between Montecito and Buckingham Palace. The world assumed it was driven by explosive television interviews, tell-all books, and endless public statements. They were wrong. As I examined the paper trail and cross-referenced private palace logs, I uncovered a far darker truth. The Midnight Decree was not triggered by public media noise. It was born in the silent, cold halls of a private chapel where no cameras were ever allowed to go. Cast your mind back to a private memorial service held inside St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. It was supposed to be a quiet moment of family dignity. The public saw only peaceful arrivals and formal attire. But behind the towering stone pillars, away from the press, an alarming exchange took place that changed royal history forever. Palace officials had organized the ceremonial procession with relentless precision. In the world of royal protocol, a procession is never just a walk into a chapel. It is a visible hierarchy. It dictates rank, duty, sovereign recognition, and official standing. When Meghan reviewed the arrangement, she discovered something that instantly raised her concern. Her name was missing from the formal family procession. I tracked the timeline of what happened next in the side nave of the chapel. Meghan confronted a senior palace official before the service even started. Her voice was low and tightly controlled, but her message carried uncompromising weight. She asserted that her royal title granted her a permanent place in state family ceremonies, regardless of whether she performed active working duties for the crown. The official stood frozen. He was trapped between rigid institutional protocol and an intense personal demand. The silence between them grew unbearable. Then came a voice that halted the argument in its tracks. Princess Anne stepped out from the shadow of the stone archway. The Princess Royal did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She looked straight at Meghan and delivered a line that cut through the room like a blade. Anne calmly informed her that no title could ever override the sovereign's direct instructions. Have you ever seen someone refuse to back down When confronted by centuries of unbroken authority, Meghan did not flinch. She looked Princess Anne in the eyes and replied that history could not be rewritten simply because the palace found her presence uncomfortable. Anne held her gaze without blinking. She issued a quiet, chilling warning. Using royal status as leverage would force the king to settle the question permanently. If the conflict had ended inside that chapel, the midnight decree might never have happened. But what took place 24 hours later pushed King Charles past the point of no return. Rather than letting the incident fade, Meghan submitted a formal written demand directly to the king's private office. I managed to review details of that extraordinary document. It formally requested guaranteed standing at all future state occasions. It insisted that her historical status could not be reduced by internal palace preferences. The king read the demand alone in his private office the following morning. The palace was completely silent. He read through the stiff legal phrasing until his eyes stopped on one specific sentence. The sentence claimed that the palace had no authority whatsoever to erase or alter her official royal position. Charles didn't shout. He didn't summon his aides. He slowly unscrewed his pen, drew a dark red line right under that single sentence, and set the paper aside without uttering a word. That was the exact second everything changed. The monarch ordered an immediate, comprehensive legal review of his sovereign powers. Constitutional lawyers and senior advisors assembled in secret behind closed doors. They combed through historic statutes, royal warrants, and centuries of constitutional precedents. Their mandate was singular: find out if the king possessed the absolute legal authority to strip official styles without parliamentary approval. What they uncovered was a narrow, ruthless mechanism. The legal team confirmed that a coordinated sovereign order carried absolute authority. It could immediately instruct every state department, foreign diplomatic post, and official registry to cease using Meghan styles instantly. It required no public debate. It required no political vote. It relied entirely on the sovereign's unchallengeable prerogative. The final shield of legal doubt had been completely destroyed. Charles held the weapon in his hands, but wielding it meant tearing his own family apart. He knew that signing the order would strike at Meghan's public identity, but the deepest emotional damage would hit Prince Harry. The king was caught in an agonizing trap. Should he protect the dignity of the 1,000-year-old monarchy, or shield his younger son from a devastating humiliation? He decided to offer one last chance. Before signing the midnight order, Charles issued a mandatory, confidential summons commanding Prince Harry to travel to Windsor Castle for a final face-to-face confrontation. No advisors were allowed in the room. No secretaries took notes. It was just a father and his son, separated by a narrow table and a thick leather folder containing the fate of the Sussex titles. What transpired inside that locked room was far more explosive than any legal document. I am about to reveal the exact, shocking words spoken during that final showdown, and the devastating ultimatum Harry gave that forced his father to sign the decree. You cannot afford to miss what happened behind those locked doors. I tracked Prince Harry's secret arrival at Windsor Castle through private palace logs, and the cold reality of that afternoon was chilling. Harry stepped onto the grounds, believing there was still time to negotiate. He thought he was walking into a family conversation. He thought he could reason with his father. He was wrong. The king had already examined every single legal path available to the sovereign. The decision was already made. I pieced together the exact details of what happened inside that sitting room. The door was locked from the inside. No private secretaries were permitted to sit in. No advisors stood in the corners. No audio recorders were turned on. It was just a monarch and his younger son, separated by a narrow mahogany table. Resting between them on the polished wood was a single, heavy leather folder carrying the full constitutional weight of the British crown. Neither man reached for it. The silence inside that room was far more dangerous than any screaming match. Charles slid the folder slowly across the surface. He spoke in a low, measured voice. He told Harry that Meghan's remaining royal styles could no longer exist in a vacuum. They could not be separated from the institutional duties attached to royal status. The king explained the foundational rule of the monarchy. If status remains without duty, the crown's authority is borrowed without its rules. It creates a dangerous precedent. It undermines the institution. A chair scraped violently against the floorboards. Harry stood up, his face tight with fury. He openly accused his father of turning a personal family disagreement into a calculated public execution of his wife's dignity. He reminded the king of everything Meghan had already surrendered: her royal security, her position, her personal trust in the system. And now, the palace was coming back to strip away the final symbol of her belonging. Have you ever watched a father stand his ground while his own child unravels right in front of him? Charles did not raise his voice to match his son's anger. He remained steady. He quietly told Harry that the monarchy could never allow royal identity to be invoked only when it offered commercial influence, global access, or state protection. He insisted that this midnight order was not an act of revenge, but the heavy tremor in the king's voice exposed the immense personal pain behind his words. Harry leaned over the table, staring directly into his father's eyes. He asked a blunt question. Was this truly about legal boundaries, or was the palace simply punishing him for daring to leave? The king paused. He looked at his son for several long seconds before admitting the harsh truth. His departure had changed everything. Then Charles offered a final opening. He opened the folder and presented an alternative option. Meghan could voluntarily relinquish the remaining titles herself before the sovereign decree was officially signed at midnight. That way, the public announcement would present the change as a mutual family agreement rather than a harsh, forced removal. Harry rejected the offer on the spot. He refused to let his wife participate in what he called a forced surrender disguised as dignity. He made it clear that Meghan would never sign away her status under duress. Charles slowly took off his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. His voice sounded less like a victorious king and more like a defeated father when he admitted that Harry's refusal left him with zero remaining options. Harry turned and walked toward the locked door. He placed his hand against the heavy brass handle, paused, and looked back over his shoulder. He asked his father if he was truly willing to choose the crown over his own child. Charles said nothing. The silence was absolute. As I examined the internal records of that day, I realized King Charles was not acting alone. Behind his painful silence stood a powerful network of royal authority that had already set the entire operation in motion. Prince William had been pressing the palace legal team for months to create absolute clarity. He warned his father that future monarchs would inherit a broken, chaotic precedent unless a firm rule was established during this reign. In William's eyes, allowing non-working royals to retain official state styles while living abroad blurred the line between public authority and private commercial freedom. Princess Anne was equally uncompromising. I uncovered a marked briefing paper that Anne personally handed to the king. She had drawn heavy lines under every section concerning title usage, ceremonial access, and international representation. She told Charles directly that rules lose all meaning the second personal emotion is allowed to bend them. She warned him that repeatedly shielding Harry from the legal consequences of his choices had only prolonged the crisis. Charles listened in silence. He knew she was right. Yet Prince William did not want this midnight order to turn into an absolute erasure of his brother's family. He personally stepped in to request a crucial safeguard clause. William insisted that the decree must target official public title usage only, strictly protecting Meghan's place in private family records, her marriage, and her motherhood. Buried deep within the constitutional files, I found that hidden clause. It explicitly preserved the couple's private family connection to the sovereign while terminating their formal status as representatives of the crown. It was a delicate distinction, but it gave Charles a final sliver of comfort. He could lock the institutional door without denying his own bloodline. Queen Camilla watched the king sign an early administrative approval page in his private study. She noticed his hand tremble slightly when Harry's formal name appeared in the explanatory notes. She leaned in and quietly asked him the one question he had been trying to avoid. Was he truly prepared to lose Harry completely? Charles completed his signature without answering right away. Then, he looked up and softly admitted that the order might cost him whatever fragile connection remained with his son. But he insisted that hesitation was now far more dangerous to the monarchy than action. By 11:59 p.m., the internal machinery of the state was fully locked and loaded. Revised entries on the official royal website, updated ceremonial order lists, and restricted diplomatic protocols were placed under strict embargo across palace IT networks. They were programmed to execute automatically the second the clock struck midnight. The order became operational while London slept. What happened 6 hours later in Montecito took the Sussex household completely by surprise. Meghan didn't receive a formal phone call from the king. She didn't get a heads up from palace aides. Instead, she found out when her assistant opened a laptop at dawn and saw that her formal royal styling had vanished from official state records overnight. I have uncovered what happened inside that California estate immediately after the discovery. Meghan didn't just break her silence, she uncovered a secret, unscripted opening left inside the palace dossier that no legal team was supposed to see. You cannot afford to miss the next chapter, because I am about to reveal the exact details of the private, off-the-record phone call between King Charles and Meghan Markle, and the shocking decision she made that caught Buckingham Palace totally off guard. The morning light in Montecito was barely breaking when the news finally landed. No courtesy call came from the king's private secretary. No diplomatic courier arrived at the gate with a sealed envelope. Instead, an assistant sat at a desk, opened a laptop, and refreshed the official royal website. The formal styles were gone. Every single reference to Meghan's royal status had been stripped from official palace records overnight. Correspondence protocols had been updated. Ceremonial order lists were rewritten. Diplomatic guidelines sent to foreign embassies had been altered, while California was still asleep. I pieced together the exact sequence of events inside the Sussex residence during those tense early hours. Meghan stood beside the table, staring down at the glowing screen. For several seconds, she didn't say a single word. The silence in that room was suffocating. Then, in a voice so cold it barely carried across the room, she asked her assistant to scroll through every line of the revised text. She watched her own identity being rewritten in real time.
King Charles has finally
She closed the
done it.
screen
He
with a
has
sharp
stripped
snap
Prince
and turned to Harry. Her first question was not about the lost titles or the public embarrassment. She asked if he had known the exact time the order would take effect. Harry admitted that he knew the king was moving forward, but he had never expected the administrative changes to go live without direct notice. The room grew colder. Then came the question that hit him like a physical blow. She asked who had been told first. When Harry quietly confessed that Prince William had received official confirmation before them, the last boundary of her composure fractured into total betrayal. She walked across the room to a dark wooden cabinet, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a heavy folder of old royal correspondence, invitations to state occasions, formal letters from the monarch, handwritten notes from a time when she was welcomed into the sovereign family. She laid them side by side on the table next to the laptop, opening page after page, searching for the exact moment belonging had dissolved into calculated rejection. The tension boiled over. Meghan wanted to launch an immediate, uncompromising public statement. She wanted to expose the Midnight Decree as an act of institutional malice and personal cruelty. Harry urged her to hesitate. He pleaded with her to wait until their legal team could assess the full scope of the order, warning that a rushed emotional response could destroy whatever remaining bridges were left. Have you ever seen a master plan unravel because of a single hidden detail? While reviewing the altered royal entries, the assistant spotted something buried deep inside the official administrative notes. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. One single privilege had not been revoked. Beneath the sweeping legal language removing her public titles lay an unpublicized, active invitation directly from King Charles. It offered Meghan a secure, one-on-one conversation with the monarch. No lawyers allowed, no palace press officers, no private secretaries recording the lines. Meghan stared at that invitation longer than she had stared at her missing titles. It presented an agonizing choice: launch an explosive public war against the crown, or answer the private call of a tired king. She chose the call. I uncovered the extraordinary details of that encrypted connection. Charles sat alone in his office at Buckingham Palace, having ordered every single advisor to leave the room. Thousands of miles away, Meghan sat alone in her study. When the line connected, neither used formal royal titles. He didn't address her with state protocol. She didn't call him Your Majesty. Stripped of century-old ceremony, they faced each other simply as two human beings whose lives had been dragged through years of public warfare. The king spoke first. His voice was quiet and heavy. He told her directly that the Midnight Order was designed to protect the constitutional structure of the crown, not to erase her marriage, her motherhood, or her place in his family. He admitted that the distinction might sound clinical to the outside world, but he insisted that while the state must define public authority, it had no right to alter personal family history. Meghan did not soften her tone. She answered that stripping her titles before a global audience signaled to millions of people that the institution viewed her as unworthy of belonging. She told him that legal phrasing could try to separate public status from private ties, but the world would hear only rejection in both. Charles listened without interrupting. He didn't offer defensive arguments. Instead, he made a confession he had avoided making for years. He admitted that the palace had failed to address the growing divide before distrust hardened into permanent resentment. A long, heavy silence fell across the secure line. Then came the moment that completely blindsided Buckingham Palace. Meghan made her decision. She told the king she would not file a legal challenge. She would not launch a public media blitz. She would not spend the rest of her life fighting an institution she had already left behind. She made it clear that her decision was not a surrender. It was an intentional choice to break a toxic cycle. Charles exhaled slowly. Relief flooded his voice, but it was mixed with profound regret. Meghan added one final, non-negotiable condition. She demanded a firm, sovereign promise that Archie and Lilibet would never be targeted or publicly punished for the choices made by their parents. The king answered instantly. He gave his word as a grandfather that their place in the family line would remain protected. Meghan ended the call, set the phone down, and found Harry standing outside the door. She looked at him with an expression of quiet, exhausted peace and uttered 3 simple words. It is over. The storm seemed to settle in California. But across the Atlantic, sunrise was bringing a massive media explosion that no one in the palace was prepared for. As dawn broke over London, the public announcement was officially released, and the country erupted in fierce debate. News broadcasts interrupted their schedules. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Front pages were printed with massive black headlines declaring that the crown had closed its doors forever. Yet, as the media war raged, a secret document was quietly deposited into the royal archives, a document that reveals the true, permanent cost King Charles paid for signing that decree. You cannot afford to miss the final chapter, because I am about to expose the ultimate aftermath of the Midnight Order and the heartbreaking message Prince Harry sent his father right before the palace gates were locked forever. The public announcement reached the world shortly after sunrise in London. In a matter of minutes, the private decision made at midnight became a national storm. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming. Television networks cut away to live feeds. Palace correspondents gathered outside under grey, overcast skies. Supporters called the king's order overdue, declaring that the monarchy had finally drawn a necessary boundary. Critics attacked it as cold, severe, and unnecessarily public. Yet one single image captured the raw emotional weight of that morning, better than any commentary could. A morning newspaper was held up against the heavy iron railings of Buckingham Palace, directly beneath the royal crest. Printed across the front page in massive black lettering were 5 stark words: "The Crown closes the door." The official statement issued by the palace was brief, restrained, and completely unyielding. It confirmed that Meghan's remaining royal styles had been formally revoked by direct order of the sovereign. It drew one very careful line: while private family relationships would endure, constitutional standing inside the British state had permanently ended. The legal language was measured. Its consequences were permanent. A small crowd began to form outside the palace gates as the news spread around the globe. People stood staring at the paper pressed against the iron bars. For a few seconds, the debate stopped. The world realized that a massive boundary had been set, and everyone understood it would never be reopened. Former household officials weighed in with cold clarity. One veteran royal aide put it simply: the family ties might remain on paper, but the royal role was dead. In California, Prince Harry watched the media storm unfold in total silence. Meghan reached over, picked up the remote, and lowered the volume as news anchors debated whether she had been defeated. She gently reminded her husband of the choice they had made on the phone hours earlier. They had chosen not to fight. They had chosen to step off the battlefield. Harry nodded slowly, but the look in his eyes revealed that acceptance did not erase the pain. In London, Prince William stood in a private reception room before a scheduled engagement. An aide quietly informed him that public opinion was deeply fractured. William listened without emotion. He asked if protests were forming outside, then instructed his team to ensure no triumphant language came from his office. He had wanted structural clarity for the institution, but he knew victory had come at a brutal cost. King Charles refused to watch the television news. Instead, the monarch walked alone into a private chapel service, seeking absolute silence while the country debated his decree. When he returned to his private study, a short, encrypted message was waiting on his desk. It was from Prince Harry. The message was brief. It contained no anger, no threats, and no legal demands. It simply confirmed that Meghan would honor her word and would not challenge the order. The battle over the titles was finished. The king walked over to his desk, picked up the fountain pen he had used at midnight, and placed it inside a deep wooden drawer. He didn't save it as a historic souvenir. He didn't showcase it. There was no triumph in his posture, only exhaustion. He closed the drawer with a quiet click, leaving the signed order behind. Effective, irreversible, and complete. Was there truly a winner in this story? Charles preserved the strict constitutional boundary he believed the crown required, but he paid for it with a father's grief. Meghan surrendered the last symbolic links to the British monarchy, but she gained absolute freedom from an institution she no longer trusted. Harry could not stop the decree, but he no longer had to live in suspense, waiting for the next strike from London. Princess Anne met Charles before dawn inside the quiet palace corridors. She told him directly that the decision had been vital for the survival of the crown, but she didn't offer false comfort. She reminded him that necessity does not take away the grief, and the king quietly agreed. By sunrise, the line had been drawn. The monarchy chose institutional protection over personal compromise. Meghan chose complete independence over formal recognition, and Harry chose his wife and children over restoration. The Midnight Decree ended neither bloodlines nor memories, but it permanently split private family ties from public sovereign authority. The long-standing conflict that had haunted the British monarchy for years was finally over. Yet, as the dust settles over Buckingham Palace, a brand new crisis is already brewing behind locked doors. In our very next story, I will expose the secret financial ledger recently discovered in the Duchy archives, a document that reveals a multi-million-dollar asset transfer Prince William made just 48 hours after the title decree went live, sparking an immediate, unprecedented clash with Queen Camilla that threatens to shake the royal family to its very core. You cannot afford to miss what comes next.